Hi, this is JP Newman, and today on Investing on Purpose, I have an episode that I've been wanting to record since the day I thought of this show with Antonio Marquez, dear friend, business partner, adventurer in life.
Oh, yeah.
And also, you, Antonio, were really one of the reasons why I think I created this whole show, is that this idea that you can have this double bottom line. Truly, everyone uses the word social impact, but like this idea of sustainable, fulfilling, profitable businesses. I mean, you and I grew up on this journey together. I mean, you and I were making this up, trying to figure it out. I think we both, from the day we met, which I can't wait to get into that story, but from the day we met, we both kind of knew without knowing any structure, any books, like that we wanted real estate and to be a successful real estate company. But there was always a spark between us, like literally from the first meeting, that it was going to be something bigger. And you and I have been co-creating this together now for how many years has it been?
Over a decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. It's been a minute.
So on this episode, I'd love to go through a little bit of our story, how you decided to go and create a $300 million fund, why you're doing the $300 million fund, and just like perspectives, because I think a lot of people don't really believe, they get cynical. You can't really have a company that's going to provide that much words like love or service. I truly mean it like a service heart. They kind of think of it as being, oh, woo-woo, a little out there. How can you have a double bottom line company that's more profitable, more competitive, kicks butt over other people in their industry, which, you know, I'm a very competitive person, but hopefully for the right reasons. Yeah. So if it's okay, Antonio, why don't we just start like a little bit with like, tell us a little about like how you got into real estate and what got you to drive your car from San Diego to Austin, Texas.
JP and I met by happenstance. I mean, it was serendipitous, it was destiny, whatever you want to call it. But you know, I started Comunidad in my kitchen with my wife. I mean, it was this dream of really building this kind of workforce housing platform, and I'll get into our why in a second. But it, you know, I came into the business without a track record. Without a background in it. I didn't work in a big real estate investment firm.
We share that in common.
Yeah, exactly. But honestly, I think that's part of one of the competitive advantages.
Yeah.
You know, it's the grit and the willingness and drive. Failure was not an option. And I kid you not, I probably talked to 200 different equity sources, potential equity sources, right? Before I, you know, came across Thrive, which is the predecessor firm of Principal's Capital Funding. And
it was on the internet, right?
It was on the internet. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have a network. I didn't have any relationships. Wow. And I called up and said, hey, listen, I'd like to talk to JP Newman. Like, who are you? And I said, well, listen, trying to do workforce housing. I know JP and the firm. I really love kind of the message and the mission. Can you please let me just have a few minutes of his time? And they graciously allowed me to patch me through, and what I thought was going to be a 10-minute and a swift, hang up and, see you later, turned into an hour conversation, talking about real estate and how we could reimagine and transform real estate in more than just four walls, right? Yeah. And really create something that is meaningful, to communities, to residents, to investors, right? And thinking of the stakeholders and ecosystem. After that, I said I wanted to meet. I came out to Austin, Texas. And again, it was, what should have been a half an hour meeting turned into 3 hours.
Yeah.
We talked about life. We talked about real estate. And the funny thing is that when I left your office, and I know you remember this vividly as well, you asked me if you could, drive me to the airport or whatever. I was like, no, I'm driving back. And that was to San Diego. So back then, the airline ticket was expensive. Yeah. I actually literally drove from California to Austin to meet you.
I remember this. Incredible.
And, but that's how much I wanted it. That's how badly I believed in what I was doing, and finding someone as special as you and the Thrive family to do it.
Well, I had a funny memory of that night. I remember walking to your car, and we were in the lobby of the office, and we were definitely connecting, right? Mm-hmm. But I was also young in my career. But you did say to me, and it was very funny, it was like a perfect line. You said to me, I just want to let you know, like, I think you're really interesting, but I have other suitors as well waiting for me. Like, if you don't get how special I am, somebody else will. And you said that in so many words. You did it very kindly. But I think that's a good business lesson too. You were generous yet scarce at the same time, and that made you even hotter.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's psychology, you know, to business and fundraising, and you know, there was truth to that, I think. But the I've always believed that you really have to build a good network. You have to have good options. You have to have good alternatives. Otherwise, your opportunity costs are too high. Running a business or with relationships or risk management, whatever it may be, and you got to hustle for that. I mean, that it's not awarded to you. You know, this isn't the grant. You know, this isn't the granted business. This is the earn it business.
It is.
So, so that's how we met. And you know, taking it a step back, I mean, I think, you know, starting Comunidad really came from a place, you know, we talked a lot about our why, and JP, you know, kind of pressed me 7 years ago about my why, right? And I really had to think deep, but my why really stemmed from my family and my heritage. And my father was a Mexican immigrant. He came in the United States. He was a farm worker, came from abject poverty in Jalisco. And he worked in California. He was a farm worker, field worker. It was pre-Chavez, so no workers' rights, no, you know, harsh working conditions. And somehow he scraped together enough change, and he was a consummate entrepreneur as well. I mean, he'd even take little, you know, coolers and be selling like food during lunch and that sort of thing while he was still being paid for picking, you know, grapes and other, you know, produce and that sort of thing. And so he started a company out of his garage and turned that into the largest distributorship of Hispanic grocery products, wholesale. So he started that with his brothers. My mom was instrumental in the business. So I kind of grew up. I cut my teeth with my family building a business.
And it wasn't this apartment. I remember you've told me that it wasn't a house. It was finally getting an apartment in America that he could actually have the foundation structure to do this.
Well, and I think also, I mean, having an apartment and a management that actually wasn't, you know, persecuting him, wasn't pressuring him, understood him. I think a lot of that was kind of that baseline of opportunity really that he needed, that stability of opportunity that he needed to go on to the next level, right, and provide for his family and start a business.
Incredible.
Although he's passed away, I mean, he still had, I mean, he's a patriot and from Mexico, but he had the fondest support, and he was a true American and believed in the American dream and the American opportunity. And everything that can be. And so in Comunidad, it's my way of the next generation, coming from an immigrant household, of paying it forward, you know, providing for communities, and doing something different. We was raised in business and real estate because he started buying real estate. He was vertically integrated. He started buying industrial warehouses so they could have all the wholesale Hispanic grocery that he'd sell to the Walmarts and the Targets and that sort of thing. So I was afflicted with the same entrepreneurial bug that my father was, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, right? I wanted to do it with purpose. I wanted to do it with passion. I wanted to do it with meaning. And Comunidad was really designed to really be at the nexus, to really provide an experience for underserved communities, diverse communities.
Did you notice, by the way, or like has this? I mean, obviously, I know the vision's grown. We've co-founded a nonprofit. It's gotten much bigger. But did you have that much vision early on that you wanted it to be something because of the experience that you had growing up?
At a fundamental level, yes.
Okay.
And so I looked at a number of different asset classes. We were in grocery, so we knew a lot of the retailers. So we were looking at a kind of an ethnic grocer kind of retail play. I was looking at self-storage in urban kind of underserved neighborhoods. I really liked that play. But I just kept on coming back to multifamily, because the demographic growth that was occurring, you know, the fastest growing renter demographic is Hispanics. I mean, the purchasing power is, you know, in a hyperbolic trend, right? Yeah. There's a higher propensity to rent. We really view ourselves as an inclusionary, you know, housing provider. And so we're really looking at the diverse aspects of community and housing as, you know, a transformer of opportunity for residents. So I think at a fundamental level, yes. Of course, it's refined and built, and how do we make the experience more rich? And I think more importantly, how can we really make the experience and the services that we provide, design them in a way so that folks have better economic opportunity, better educational opportunity, better health access. And so hopefully the next generation is doing better than the previous, right?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those cycles, this fortuitous cycle that occurs.
So First of all, I know, Antonio, that you and I have talked a lot about this. I actually didn't realize the dirty little secret of real estate. I think a lot of times I talk about with housing, it tends to be, you actually get into the words that you use the words accretive and extractive.
A lot.
That our business, real estate, it's very easy to commoditize the tenants and just call them renters, right? These are 900 square foot boxes in multifamily. And I don't think, again, I think it's business as usual. I don't think this is people being evil. I think it's investors and owners trying to maximize profit, but unfortunately it comes sometimes at the expense of the renters. And yet, Antonio, out of all the people that I've done business with, you have the number one track record as far as return, IRR. I got to imagine we're over 2 billion at this point. Would you say you've done? Are you over 2 billion now as far as assets? Have you thought about it?
No, I really don't.
I bet you're 2 to 3 billion. Yeah. How many thousands of units?
And we'll get to that. Like I actually don't.
Okay.
I don't look at that, but I know I probably should have that because there's
so it's interesting because here you are. You've raised more than you've raised probably. I'm going to guess we've done a couple $1 billion, thousands. I'm going to guess 17 to 20,000 units if I was to guess. I can't keep track because we keep buying things. And yet you keep saying, I want to be accretive to the process and the whole process, because you also have investors you have to report to. You've got institutions now. When we started out, it was just private individuals. Now you've got some of the largest, universities, endowments in the nation that you're responsible to. And yet you keep talking about this idea of being accretive and not extractive to the residents. But obviously you have to report, you have a whole ecosystem. You are a for-profit company.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? How do you navigate that one? And why are you outperforming everybody? Because you are outperforming not only the industry, you're outperforming just about everybody. And I'm just wondering, could you answer those?
Yeah. I mean, it's very simple. I mean, I'm a first principles guy. So I approach things from a first principles perspective. And if you really kind of break things down to their essence, right? And really what drives things. And, in housing, particularly housing, it's not going to be any surprise. It's just focusing on the people. I mean, I think we get too caught up in an asset class that is, it's physical plant, it's building things, it's stuff, right? And
sparkling pools and laundry rooms. Let's raise the rents and put in new countertops. Let's paint the place, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and just amenities that just don't matter at the end of the day. I mean, on the margin, sure. Like you can have fancy things that maybe attract people, but how do you keep people? How do you think about the needs, wants, and the cultural idiosyncrasies of people? And although real estate is the largest asset class in the world, yeah, I think it's one of the least progressive when it comes to the customer and the people that are your users, that underlie really the stuff, the physical environment that we're ultimately in. And if you focus on what they want and you tailor a product, you tailor an experience, you tailor services that really drive at the core of what's important to them, then the natural byproduct is great results. It's retention, it's higher occupancies, it's lower delinquency. During the COVID, collections eviction moratorium, right? Preventing evictions, right? And so
referrals,
resident referrals, right? And really being less dependent on online marketing and ILS and leasing agents and outsource, because we believe our best source of customer is our own, right? And they're normally going to beget other good customers through resident referrals. So I think it just comes back to focusing on the people, focusing on what they are looking for, and then
I ask you one question: how do you know what they're looking for? Everybody, big companies do market surveys, and this. I mean, there's millions of companies owning millions of buildings. So what is different? Because you are doing something different. Your performance, your metrics are higher, and I'm sure everyone would say, we know what our residents want, but they must not. What do you think? What do you think about your process or your story that you just told? Maybe makes you a little more in tune to actually going beyond the superficial, going deeper to really kind of, because I think what you're describing is like an emotional need or a connection,
right,
which creates these great results. Well, how would you describe that?
Well, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that it really comes from people that understand people that they're serving, right? So I think there's a background perspective, there's a cultural, awareness, and really an acute understanding of what's going on in these communities. And we're a diverse and minority-owned, 100% minority and women-owned firm. So I think that keeps a good finger on the pulse because, growing up, my father didn't speak the language.
Wow.
He didn't have a credit score. right? He, it was really challenging for him to get a job, and he started a company without those things, yet he was able to overcome them. And so I think these communities have incredible potential, but there's a lot of challenges. And so I'm overcoming those because there is great opportunity. Living, through that and understanding how my father and mother and family navigated those things was helpful. And also, understanding, well, it would have been nice to have, a bank that understood, how immigrants kind of translate, because there is an aversion to financial institutions and systems. It's very deeply embedded in the culture because of how compromised the financial systems are from their native countries, right? So I think it's just those little nuances is one piece. The other piece is just having intention around, making sure that your team really connects with your residents. And so resident engagement, I think of everything that we do, that is probably we call it secret salsa.
Your secret salsa.
Yeah,
I love
that's
that.
probably the most important. Now, it's not some sort of silver bullet. It's not even that sexy, but it's hard work. And that is the magic of, without that foundational building block, we can't do everything else.
Hi, this is JP Newman of Investing on Purpose. So glad you're enjoying the show. Just want to remind you that these episodes are all about diving into some great thoughts, but it is for entertainment purposes only. This is not investment advice. So let's have fun and enjoy the show. So I'm going to stop you in your tracks because this is important. This is where men can get men. If you think about the word resident engagement, because it's a very, in our term, it's used a lot, resident engagement. Mm-hmm. Think about the emotion behind resident engagement. What is, like I always say for me, my core, there's actually a sign in my office. It says respect. Mm. And so I started using the word respect. But what I really meant by respect was to even go deeper, which was decency.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, what's the emotion behind decency? And for me, it really comes down to, it sounds really strange when I said, I was embarrassed. In fact, I don't talk about this much. I used to use the word respect in my office, but it's actually love.
Yeah.
It's actually love for these people. It's loving a stranger. And I can't even explain it. It's really like, it sounds woo as I say it. I'm uncomfortable saying it, but I know that's what it is. It's actually still a challenge for me, by the way. For me, my dream is actually getting to the point, it's like an experiment of like, can you really love someone that is a stranger that may have nothing to do with the way you're living your life or anything? Because you at least have the cultural story. I don't. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Like, if you were to take resident engagement for you personally and put an emotion or an emoji behind it, what are you actually trying to create? And then how does it translate to business? But
it's love and compassion. I mean, it's hard. You're right. We're in real estate. It's a bravado type of industry. It's a pound your chest. And, but at the end of the day, and it's different than love with a spouse or a family member or that sort of thing, right? There's different forms of love. And I think it's really care and compassion for the people that are part of a journey, right? Or a part of a community, a part of what you're really trying to create. That's something special. And so, from our team members at Comunidad to our residents, that's what we're really trying to do. We're actually trying to permeate a culture of careness. And that's really what it is. And the beauty is that if you think of like all the stakeholders and getting back to the extractive, piece versus additive and accretive, historically value add multifamily has been extractive. You go in, you upgrade units, you spend 20, 30 grand, and then you take, rents up to the hilt, substantial increases. Our approach is, how do we focus on community? How do we focus on amenities? How do we focus on services that are valuable to our residents? Because residents are our greatest asset.
Yeah.
And if you invest in them and you care for them, right? Because then it's not a transaction. Then it's really a relationship.
Right.
That pays significant dividends, right? And this is where it comes back to what you're saying. How do you balance the mission and the social aspects with being a good fiduciary for your investors as well? And the answer to that is, listen, if you're wholly focused on just one end of the spectrum, maximizing profitability, that's the old way of doing business. That's archaic.
It is.
And if you think more holistically about the value proposition and how you get all stakeholders to win at some level, right? But everyone wins, and that's a much more sustainable business model. We, from a vision perspective at our firm, we've never aspired to be the biggest. We've never aspired to be the most profitable because short-term profitability. Well, that
you are. But
that's the secret salsa, right? That's the magic.
Because you're not trying. You're saying your point is it's like not trying.
Because it's organic. Yeah. And I'm thinking about things from a long-term perspective. I'm focusing at the source of success. I'm not focusing on some sort of derivative of the success, right? Which puts undue pressure. That's artificial pressure and all these other elements of an organization, from
Right.
residents to your team to your capital
Right.
partners and that sort of thing. And we do it with authenticity and intention. And so the natural byproduct is those results.
Right.
We don't pro forma those results.
Right.
We don't even engineer those results. We
Right.
focus on the source of what can really translate into those results.
Right. So I have a question. I'm going to take that. That's amazing. Do you have a moment either that's happened recently in the past or even a vision of the future of what resident, I'm going back to resident engagement for you personally, because you're being humble. You are right. It is about your team, but it always starts from the top. This is back to a mutual friend we had, Dino. And he always says, if your company is going really well, if your company has a morale issue, it's probably coming from the top, not the bottom. So for you personally, do you have a moment where with a resident that you had a personal resident engagement, or one that you kind of dream for in the future as you're pushing this? Because there's something in you that's creating the whole wrapper for this to happen.
Well, I think during COVID, again, I love being on property. I love creating just a resident, experience and understanding, what our residents need, and having a moment where I can shake them and talk to them about what their dreams are, what their fears are, what their concerns are, what their kid,
Even a leaky sink.
All that stuff, right?
Right.
I mean, I think, there's beauty in something that's ugly, sometimes, and so, but if you continue to understand it and have an appreciation for it, it can be very, very beautiful over time, especially if you craft it and you try and, support it and cultivate it and that sort of thing. And what I mean by that is, the ugly side, the inconvenient truth of kind of underserved communities and some of the obstacles, the artificial obstacles that occur, but really creating something that can be supportive, right, and game changing in terms of how can we change the trajectory of residents' lives. So
how will you know though? Like in my mind, I want to tell you one other funny, like on what I was saying to you, I actually envision, and it's happened to me a couple of times with residents, just a few times. One of them was at our property, an early property we did called Windcrest, where the resident hugged us because they went from a place of it was dangerous, if you remember, and there was beatings and and we turned the place around and I got a hug, and I'll never forget that hug. Like, I'm not on property the way you are as much. I'm more on the equity side. So sometimes I need to leave this tower and go out a little bit more than I have, but I'll never forget that woman hugging me and thanking me for changing, because she said it was now a safer place for her kids. And that stuck in my mind from that long ago.
Right. And the thing is that you can't boil these communities and residents down to spreadsheets and financial models, right? And, investment packets. You can't boil them down to that. You have to understand who they are, where they come from, what's important to them. And that only can occur if you're really kind of on the ground. And listen, I've got a very busy schedule, but I still take time out to be on the ground at certain intervals throughout the year, just to make sure I don't lose sight. I never lose perspective. I don't take anything for granted.
It makes a lot. I mean, with the story that you're telling me, that gratitude, I hear it when you tell the story. I totally understand how your story growing up and your father's story and your family story threads into like that humbleness, the gratitude, the appreciation.
I'll tell you one of my favorite stories from a resident perspective was one probably the most challenging, times we've ever had. Right? I mean, you can learn from your failures, and this is another vulnerable part of real estate. I don't think we talk about failures enough. One of our biggest challenges was in the Texas winter storm, where we had a community that was significantly impacted. The community did not have water for 2 weeks. We couldn't get plumbers to the site. We literally had to transport parts from California to Texas. We literally had asset managers that were in our office in San Diego, went to Home Depot and shipped it. Thousands and thousands of dollars just in shipping costs to actually bring it. But residents don't understand those challenges, and so as a result,
they just don't have water, and they have kids, and they have
kids.
Right.
Exactly, they got families that go to jobs and that sort of thing, and so they organized and really started picketing at our community outside, and didn't have great things to say about us, and I got, even from some of our internal team, said, Antonio, do not engage, do not interface. That is risky.
Social media, you could be slaughtered as the greedy landlord. The story I've seen these where the story gets totally turned, like good intention, which is you're trying to solve the problem, but the media, you could take a soundbite of you as just being a slumlord or something horrible.
And the media did.
Wow.
The media did initially, right? But so what was absolutely critical to me is that we engage with the residents, we meet them where they are, we talk to them about the issues, and we're open about the challenges and some of the obstacles that we're facing. But we're absolutely committed to getting this right and making sure that they have a home that is secure, decent, and has all the amenities. And what we turned into a very volatile, almost hostile situation. We converted, and those residents became our greatest allies.
Yeah.
And still to this day, reach out to us and say that they thank us for how we handled that and how we navigated that and that sort of thing.
A lot of what you're talking about is that emotional bridge. I think a lot of times in business, and men maybe more than women, but we tend to get very into the hows, as opposed to what a person wants to feel is they want to feel heard, they want to feel recognized, they want to be seen. And I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk about the plan, the strategy, and I think that says a lot. Yeah. So Antonio, I'm going to go, speaking of how, I'm going to go a little more into the how section, because I think it would be remiss to say what you just created, and I have to say Thrive is part of this thing. I'm so grateful to be part of it. Integral. But then as an investor too, I have to say it on camera. We started out with this idea that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we were hiking in Africa together.
Mount Kilimanjaro.
And that's where SIMFA came from, which is your newest $300 million of equity fund. So it's really $1 billion fund when it's all said and done. $1 billion fund. We made it up. We were hiking Kilimanjaro at about 10,000 feet. I remember I was getting a little lightheaded, which maybe helped. And you and I dreamed of this idea of really, and we also came up with really the nonprofit that day too, about what Veritas, a nonprofit, could look like with resident services. Like, how could we change this industry to be more creative? And really, we're bringing social impact into workforce multifamily housing. Well, fast forward from a hike that we took, we called it SIMFA because we were in Africa, and Simba. Yeah. And also, if you remember, SIMFA is the Hebrew for blessing. And it was a great acronym for social impact multifamily housing. Like that was a great trip. And but again, you once again have broken the principles of like most people don't raise $300 million on a first fund, don't get the top pension funds, top universities. They wait. They want to wait and make sure. And these people, because I had to take a lot of the phone calls when they were making references. I was on the phone calls, and I'm going to be honest, there were some pretty boring phone calls. Institutions, they don't think, they're not as, I don't want to criticize them, just didn't feel as creative. It didn't feel like they're big organizations. They don't move as nimble. How did you do it? How did you talk these large groups into putting in their first fund with you?
Well, I think so the good thing about these groups is that they're really good people, and they're super sharp. And you are right. They do have certain parameters, right, that they have to
and committees.
Yeah. I would say we actually got fortunate, with our partners, because they were probably more of the nimble than most of the institutions. So, but to your point, I mean, it's very hard to break in. The barriers to entry are pretty significant, and there's a reason for that. I mean, these are, again, these are guardians at the gate of very large endowments and pensions and that sort of thing. So they want to make sure that if they're investing with somebody, they can invest in somebody that, it has good risk management protocols, isn't going to risk, their investment, and really has something special, right? Because they have to drive alpha, do something different, because there's a lot of other multifamily operators.
And social impact became, it's funny, right when you launch, social impacts become, everybody wants to have a social impact fund. So like, it's easy to get lost in the crowd right now.
Precisely. Yeah. And so I think the difference in terms of, we didn't start a social impact fund, right? Because that is now the rage, right? We've been doing social impact since before it was cool, as we like to say. But I think it came from, again, authenticity. They took the time to understand who we are, what we're about, our why.
And you have a track. You also have a track record.
The track record doesn't hurt. Yeah. Finally, we got the track record. Yeah. And or after a decade of investing and curating, communities and that sort of thing. But then I think the other piece is just how we went about ESG, because it wasn't ESG.
So ESG is
environmental, social, and governance.
So ESG is like a good corporate term right now. Corporations that are trying to do practices that incorporate environmental, social impact, social governance, and what was the G? Oh, governance.
Governance. Sorry, right, exactly. Okay. So good controls and good transparency of information, and diversity, equity, inclusion is just part of that. And that's, who we are. That's just in our DNA. It's just natural to us. Right. But the real differentiator was we're in workforce housing, and people know that there's an affordable housing crisis in America. But then how do we translate ESG into ultimately economic output, right? And I think that
without that, they're not going to say yes to you. They don't believe it.
Absolutely, right? And that's the only way it's sustainable. That's the only way it's scalable. And so what we had to do is tie each, the E, the S, and the G into, how does that translate into economic, potential?
Yeah.
And so the environmentals, we're doing LED lighting, we're doing water retrofitting, right? We're doing these things that can actually lower the utility load, lower the utility costs, while also making sure that we're reducing our carbon footprint.
Right, which is also a benefit to both the residents and actually the owners too, because the way the utilities get split in apartment buildings, the expenses are split. So
correct.
Right.
Correct. And then, the G is the governance. So better reporting, better controls, right? That's the other thing is, from a compliance perspective, it's just a whole other level than when we really started out.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. It's more work, of course, but it makes us more rigid. It makes us, less susceptible to some sort of cybersecurity impact or reporting impact or a data or valuation or financials being compromised, right? And then the diversity piece that we were talking about earlier, I do believe that translates into better value, especially over time. And I think the other thing is that we're a relatively young shop.
Yeah.
I mean, the average age is in the low 30s. And so we're kind of tech forward, we're progressive. Generationally, we've got, from a recruiting perspective, it's phenomenal because our story really resonates with this new generation because they want to be part of something special and meaningful. And so that's just who we are, and we just cultivate I think a really interesting culture so we can recruit kind of the top talent. And then it gives them runway too. So, if from a strategy perspective, they can put money to work for a long period of time and significant dollars at scale.
Cool. And so I know you were just appointed the head of workforce housing for the National Multifamily Housing. Mm-hmm. And I know you were recently at the Biden White House, and you're really the head advocate for the industry right now as far as policy. One of the things that I see is that it seems like some of these things, like the housing crisis in America, whether it's affordability or even affordability for the workforce or just better conditions, it seems like part of this just needs to be a government and also a capitalistic approach.
Yeah.
How do you, now that you're you're becoming knee deep and thicker in advocating for our entire industry policy, but you're also a capitalist and a for-profit company. We know we have these severe imbalances, severe affordability crisis. In fact, I talked to Tom Bacon recently, I interviewed him on a show, mm-hmm. where we are in a long-term problem with that. How are you viewing both? How do you view it now as a capitalist through Comunidad, and how you view it now as, are you a lobbyist, would you say, or are you an advocate? How would you describe your position to the government? Because you're in a really unique position on both sides.
I'd say I am a supporter, and technically I'm an advocate. But I think more importantly, this has always been a journey, right? And for the last decade, and there's not going to be any one tool or solution that's going to get it done. And so, to your point, yeah, it's going to take governmental support, but it's incumbent on us as leaders to also find, private market solutions. And so I think marrying those two aspects.
Can they be married? Do you still have faith in our dysfunctional government? Can things get done?
I've never been more optimistic.
Really?
I've never been more optimistic.
Interesting.
Than now. And so, and I think it's just because it's gotten to epidemic, levels. It is a systemic issue. And I think government is almost compelled. There's no other choice. Now,
just because we've had what's the rent increases been in the last? How much has housing gone up in America? It's some crazy number. Do you know?
I mean, so rental rate growth was around 12%. I mean, it could 12 to 15% depending on you.
But that was last year.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the last 5 years. I mean, we've had massive. Where now it's almost like 50% of people. It used to be like 30%, 20% of one's income would go towards rent. And I think, what are we at? Do you know what about 40?
So half of the nation cannot afford rent. I mean, and then about a third.
And they can't afford a house either. So they're really stuck.
Same thing. I mean, it's no longer just a rental problem. It's a housing problem as a whole. And so lawmakers and legislators and, even the private markets realize that there's a need. And so we're going to have to come together. Like I said, I think there is a real opportunity here if we seize it. There's always going to be compromises and trade-offs. That's just inherent in these things. But if we're looking at the greater good and the greater opportunity, that's why I'm extraordinarily optimistic. The White House and the Biden administration have had a significant commitment to this. Now, Build Back Better, they weren't able to get through, but there was an Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that came through that is allocating dollars to this. There are incentives at the state and local level that are percolating through the system through tax abatement strategies. We've done property tax abatement strategies.
Right.
JP
You bring the rent down, right? They're like public-private partnerships, they're called.
Public-private partnerships,
right.
Nonprofit-private partnerships,
right.
Grants that are being provided, although that I don't think is as scalable. But there are really interesting solutions that are actually being developed right now that I think is going to move the needle. I
love your optimism, because I think it's so easy to say we have so many problems, how are we going to solve them? And the answer from hearing from you is there's no hammer that solves everything, but we solve it, we move forward a little bit at a time with little moves at a time.
Yeah, we can't rely on government to do it all, right? I mean, I think we should expect them to provide the catalyst, right? We should expect them to provide tools that catalyze it. But it's on us. It's on the private sector to get creative. I remember, Tom was talking about the creativity. We need to think about innovative ways to address this problem. And there are different solutions. I mean, tax and treasury, there are interesting solutions there. Modular housing, 3D printing. We're also talking about different ways to access land. I have a partner in Miami, Florida, where we're partnering with a faith-based organization, a church with excess land, right, to actually provide true workforce housing.
Amazing.
Transit systems have a lot of excess land. Now, again, there's some bureaucracy to all these things, but the need is so grave that we've got to press on with these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, even if it gets people out of their comfort zone. We've got to think bigger, and we got to think more creatively, and that's the only way to do it.
So Antonio, if you're listening to this right now, obviously you and I have been very blessed. I left Los Angeles 17 years ago, moved to Austin, Texas. In hindsight, it seemed to be that was a pretty good decision, as far as we've had a great wave. We've watched real estate prices go up and up and up, like all the equities. And we've been fortunate for our investors. We've had great returns. But if you're starting out now, if you're new to the real estate business, or you've been investing and you're the first 5 years of your career, I guess I have two questions for you. What advice would you give someone who's kind of earlier in the industry? And then do you still think there's opportunity right now in our business?
So from my perspective, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, especially now. Yes, valuations have gone up, and yes, it's just the margins for error are much tighter than during the GFC and 08, 09. But if you think of the demographic growth that are occurring and the supply-demand imbalance, there is a lot of room for innovators that want to figure out different ways to either preserve or create housing. Now, my advice to them would be, don't give up. I mean, if it's something that you're really interested in, stay committed to it. Yeah. Because it took us 5 years to get our first deal done.
It did. Was it that long? Was it 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was that long. Yeah. My gosh. Yeah, we talked a lot, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
We dreamed a lot.
You made me earn it.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, that's good. I mean, it also created, kind of the discipline, and it created, really, the judiciousness that we needed to still be here, over a decade, and done, 22 deals and probably $1 billion worth of transactions together. But so I'd say commit to it, be open, be humble about, even if you don't have, if you're still trying to understand things, I always say ask the stupid questions, because many times you can find very profound answers in what you believe to be stupid questions. But those fundamental questions, even guys that have been doing it for a long time, I get questions like, how do you make money in real estate? Like, whoa, okay, that's a good question. Yeah. So just little things like that if you just apply yourself and are committed to it.
Also, I think from what you heard you say, I think it's been both of our experiences. Whatever the industry tells you that can't be solved. I know with Tom Bacon, they told him you can't build. Mm-hmm. You just can't build new properties in the right neighborhoods to support workforce housing residents. There's a lot of, in almost all industries, there's always People will tell you why you can't do something. Antonio, why you can't build a fund that can have these amazing impacts on residents and still be the most profitable. That would feel counterintuitive to most people. So I think also being creative and being willing to lean in harder when there's a no, or what might seem like hard or depressing or difficult to deal with. I think sometimes that the most opportunities is the one who kind of stands out and dives deeper into that problem rather than just giving up on that problem, which is really what you did in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, it creates a lot of, white space. I mean, when you actually put up these barriers, because it's the old way of thinking, right? I think that creates the biggest opportunity. Yeah. When you hear no,
and then you're gonna hear it a bunch of times, and it's like you just piece your way out of it, right?
And that means you're not thinking hard enough, right? That means that you're not trying hard enough. I mean, I love the line. I'd rather be working smarter than harder.
Yeah,
like those are the people that work smarter rather than harder, probably the ones that aren't going to be that successful.
Yeah.
Why can't you have both?
Right.
Let's work smart and hard. And so that's part of the thing is, and I always say in commercial real estate in particular, you don't have to do a lot to do well. And so what that does is it breeds complacency, and it breeds this environment where innovation isn't embraced. And again, getting people out of their comfort zone and challenging the status quo and doing things differently. I mean, that's how we built our business. And that's why I say I'm more optimistic than ever, because I think there is a changing of the guard generationally. And I think,
I think there is
new
too.
Entrants that want to come in, that we can really shake things up and
there's going to be financial tech, property tech. We're already seeing it all over the place.
Prop tech.
I'll save it for the next, actually I'll save it for my next episode, but I'm seeing now new marketplaces to bring investors in beyond crowdsourcing, beyond NFTs. There's a new one that I'll share with you next time that just came out 3 weeks ago. That's going to revolutionize the industry. It's going to disrupt and revolutionize financing of traditional limited investor partners into a whole new way.
I will tune in.
You will tune in. Last question. I know I've gone a little longer than usual, but I could sit here for 3 hours with you, Antonio. I love this. 100%. Last question is going to be a hard one. You ready? Let's talk about your personal legacy. Mm-hmm. So, you've been at this. You're still young though, and you've become a leader in this industry. You literally are role modeling other people from both a cultural mission and also a investment strategy thesis. But for you, 5, 10, 15 years from now, how will you know that you accomplished? What is your legacy, and how will you know that you accomplished it?
Well, I think it's not, a brand or anything to that effect. I think if we can really allow for communities that have really had challenges historically, right? And Raj Chetty, with Harvard and Opportunity Insights actually did this landmark study in terms of folks that are in high opportunity zones have better outcomes, right? If you're in a low income zip code, surprise, you probably aren't going to have the same educational attainment. You're probably not going to have the same income. And, my legacy, I hope, is that, and I don't know if I'll even see this in my lifetime, this is probably many lifetimes ahead of me.
Let's go audacious.
And that's how you have to think, right? Yeah. Is that we really have, and this isn't egalitarian, but at least folks that want to provide for their families and folks that really are going to work hard and strive for something more for their families have all the opportunities in the world to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be artificial obstacles. I think housing is a stabilizer and a determinant. It can be a springboard for all that. And so in my mind, if we can look at housing as more of a vehicle for change and a vehicle of opportunity, as opposed to just 4 walls and a roof, and we can change that mindset and reimagine housing into an apparatus for success and opportunity for underprivileged and frankly underestimated. I don't even call them underserved; they're underestimated.
I love
communities. Then I think that's what I really want.
I think that's just amazing. Antonio, first of all, I never usually ask for questions, but if there's any questions, because this actually goes a lot deeper. We just touched the surface on this stuff. Feel free to email me. We'll make sure we put down my email for the podcast, and I can get some questions to Antonio. And Antonio, I just want to thank you, not only for sharing us for today, but thank you for who you are. Thank you for the vision, and just thank you for the brotherhood and friendship. I'm just so honored to that we get to spend in each other's orbit and live life and this journey together. And
man,
thank you.
No, I mean, the feeling is mutual, man. You know what I think of you. I mean, Comunidad would not be where it's at without you, and Thrive
wouldn't either.
and me personally, at a personal level, I've grown, and we've come up in this business together. And so, yes, love is a weird rainbow and butterflies, but I love you. I love you, brother. And thank you. This is an incredible journey, and I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.